Imagine yourself standing in an empty corridor of Kensington Palace. Yellow light spills across the ancient walls. No cameras, no ceremony. Only Prince William standing there, his face darkened, his eyes red from many sleepless nights. He leans close to a trusted aide and whispers a sentence that seems to freeze the air itself. Harry and Meghan helped create this nightmare. Catherine's cancer, a cold accusation, heavy and filled with fury. This is not a sensational headline from a novel. This is what is being whispered behind the walls of the British royal family. William truly believes that prolonged psychological pressure, the interviews, the books, the endless lawsuits brought by his brother have pushed the woman he loves into the most brutal fight of her life. But this tragedy did not appear overnight. Just a few months earlier, King Charles still held on to hope for reconciliation. He wanted to see Harry, to talk, to salvage a family that was breaking apart. Then everything reversed. A cold turn. When Harry returned to Britain for his court case with the Daily Mail, Charles refused to meet his son. Sources inside Buckingham Palace confirmed that the king had come to see reconciliation as a strategic mistake. Inside Clarence House, it is said that Charles sat silently for hours beside a cup of tea, gone cold, understanding that he no longer had the strength for another family crisis. The British public increasingly sided with William and Catherine. Many voices even suggested that Harry should be pushed further away, symbolically exiled, much like the Duke of Windsor once was. Meanwhile, Harry's lawsuit was viewed as a deeply personal and vengeful battle, dragging behind it the past of hacking, phone tapping, and wounds that never truly healed. So what do you think? Did family tension truly contribute to the destruction of Catherine's health? Or is William speaking from the anger of a husband terrified of losing his wife? Leave a comment below and join me as we dive deeper into this story. From the climax, back to its origins, and the consequences that are quietly reshaping the British royal family forever. To understand why William holds a view many consider harsh, we must turn back the clock, beginning with the most recent moment, the brief tea meeting between Charles and Harry in September 2025. Imagine Clarence House on an afternoon in September 25. A familiar space suddenly feels suffocatingly heavy. King Charles sits at the tea table, his frame thinner than before, his skin pale after rounds of cancer treatment. The teacup in front of him is barely touched. The meeting with Prince Harry has been arranged, not out of desire, but because there was no other option. According to sources close to the situation, Charles understood one thing very clearly. If he refused to see his son, that decision could be transformed into yet another media narrative, a new symbol of royal coldness. And in his fragile health, he did not have the strength for another media storm. The meeting lasted exactly 50 minutes. There were no healing embraces, no promises of the future, only an awkward tea. According to accounts, Charles felt more pressured than proactive. He listened. He responded cautiously. But beneath it all, a quiet anxiety burned, that any gesture could be interpreted in the most damaging way possible. When Harry left, relief did not arrive. Only the exhaustion of a father and a king battling illness remained. Yet just months later, everything changed completely. Buckingham Palace quietly allowed the Times to report that King Charles would not be in London when Harry returned to Britain at the end of January 2026. Instead, he chose to remain in Scotland. A carefully calculated decision. No meeting, no contact, no images that could be exploited. The official reason was that the king did not wish to be associated with Harry's lawsuit against Associated Newspapers, a case many inside the palace viewed as driven by personal resentment. Harry continued to rely on allegations of phone hacking to attack the press, particularly the Daily Mail. For Charles, this was the final line. The image described internally as that of an aging king, his hand trembling slightly as he signed the decision to avoid his son. Not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. He understood that at this moment, every unnecessary encounter was a risk, and his health could no longer afford a single mistake. While King Charles chose to retreat in silence at Kensington Palace, Prince William no longer concealed his emotions. His anger did not erupt in public. It smoldered, heavy, and carried the deepest fear of a husband. According to sources close to him, William truly believes that prolonged psychological pressure from Harry and Meghan contributed to pushing Catherine into her current condition, not through isolated shocks, but through continuous erosion, day after day, headline after headline. Each time their family name was dragged across the front pages. Imagine a private room inside Kensington late at night. Soft light, no ceremony, no guards. Catherine lies in a hospital bed, her face visibly thinner after rounds of treatment. William sits beside her, his hand gripping hers as if letting go would mean losing her. According to accounts in his weakest moments, William whispered to Catherine that none of this came from nowhere, that the books, the documentaries, the bitterness-filled narratives had poisoned their lives for years, not through violence, but through stress, the silent killer no one can see. Journalist Tom Sykes of the Daily Beast once observed that William views the pressure from Spare and the Netflix series as a contributing factor. Not in a scientific sense. There is no medical proof, but it is how a desperate husband tries to find meaning for his pain. When facing cancer, people search for something to hold on to. An explanation, someone to direct their anger toward. For William, that focus became Harry and Meghan. Those emotions changed William. He became more withdrawn, less patient, and hardened to the point of coldness. Calls for reconciliation no longer reached him. In William's eyes now, every action by Harry carries the risk of shattering the fragile stability his family is fighting to preserve. This is not the reasoning of a politician. This is the instinct of a father who fears that any wave could sink the boat carrying the woman he loves most. As the controversy reached its peak, one familiar voice in the British media became especially notable. Colin Brazier, a veteran journalist who has followed the royal family for decades. In a controversial commentary, Colin stated bluntly that Harry had stabbed his brother in the back, not through a single impulsive moment, but through a calculated series of actions spanning many years. According to him, what Harry made public did not merely cause personal pain, it eroded the foundation of trust within the royal family. Colin Brazier emphasized that the current context has completely altered how William views his brother. When Catherine entered her battle with cancer, William was no longer the brother seeking reconciliation. He became a husband and a father in a state of absolute defense. According to Colin, Catherine's illness did not soften William. It hardened him, made him less forgiving, and willing to sever ties he believes to be harmful. Colin also pointed out a critical truth. The royal family is not merely a private family, it is a national one. Every personal action carries public consequences. According to him, when Harry chose to tell his story through books, films, and interviews, he placed personal emotion above collective interest. In royal logic, that is unacceptable, not out of cruelty, but out of historical responsibility. By Colin's reasoning, many people criticize William as cold and unfeeling. But that judgment ignores the core reality. William is not acting under normal conditions. He is carrying the pressure of succession, public scrutiny, and the fear of losing his wife all at once. In such circumstances, drawing a hard boundary with Harry is not revenge. It is a survival response. Colin Brazier's perspective may be uncomfortable, but it reflects a difficult truth. Within the royal family, kinship exists only when it does not threaten role. And William at this moment has chosen that role decisively. The drama reached its climax when the issue of security was placed on the table. Prince Harry demanded state protection when returning to Britain, a request that immediately triggered outrage within royal circles. According to close sources, this was the moment William reacted most fiercely. In his eyes, this was no longer about personal safety. It was a dangerous precedent. William feared that if the request were approved, Harry would gain the tools to construct what he saw as a rival court, without a throne, but with symbolism, with media, and with the British public's tax money. William views this issue through the lens of power. If Harry is protected by public funds, that means he is still being recognized as part of a system he has publicly criticized. To William, this is an unacceptable paradox. A man who walked away from his royal role, who presents himself as a victim, yet still wants to claim the highest privileges when it suits him. According to advisors, William sees this as a red line, not only because of Toa, but because of the message it sends to the public. The anger intensified when Harry's international trips were brought into comparison, especially the highly performative visit to Colombia. Inside royal circles, many viewed it as indefensible. Harry was willing to appear in places considered high risk, yet demanded special protection when returning home. To William, this was morally illogical and politically unacceptable. The image of Harry walking into a London courtroom demanding security from the very state he continually attacks was seen as arrogant and deeply inconsistent. The British public is also sharply divided. Some believe Harry has a right to protection, but the majority ask a blunt question. If he is no longer a working member of the royal family, why should the public pay for his safety? That question is precisely why William's stance has received quiet but widespread support, and it is here that all the pieces fall into place. This is no longer a personal dispute, not just a family wound. This is a confrontation over principle. But this climax did not arise on its own. To understand why everything escalated to this point, we must return to the origin. The moment of Megxit in 2020, when Harry made a choice the royal family viewed as the first act of exile. Let us turn back to January 2020, the Sandringham Summit, a closed room warm with the scent of old wood and history, an antique table where some of the most consequential royal decisions had been made. Queen Elizabeth sat at the center, her back straight, her gaze calm but heavy with concern. To her right stood Prince Charles. To her left, Prince William. When Harry entered, the atmosphere shifted instantly. This was no longer a family meeting. It was a defining moment. According to accounts later shared, Harry arrived with a firm stance. He did not ask permission. He did not probe for approval. He spoke of his desire to step away from a working royal role. He wanted freedom. He wanted control over his life and his own narrative. Meghan was not in the room that day, but her presence seemed to hover over the meeting. In Harry's mind, this was a decision made by two people, and it was irreversible. The Queen listened. She did not interrupt. When Harry finished, the room fell into silence. Then she spoke. Her voice was not raised. There was no reproach, but it was resolute. The Queen warned that every choice carries consequences. One cannot leave and still retain privilege. One cannot stand outside the system while continuing to benefit from it. Charles and William agreed. This was not a threat. It was the principle by which the monarchy exists. Harry is said not to have backed down. He accepted the consequences. According to those close to him, Meghan told him they would be free, that beyond the royal family lay a world where they could decide everything for themselves. That was the moment Harry chose his own path. When he left Sandringham, a chapter closed. The outcome came swiftly and coldly. Working royal titles were removed. Access to state-funded security ended. They no longer represented the Queen. They no longer stood within the formal structure of power. For the royal family, this was an inevitable consequence. For Harry, it was the price of freedom. Years later, those who witnessed that moment still recall a subtle image. Queen Elizabeth gently shaking her head, not in anger, but in regret. She understood better than anyone that once a member leaves the system, the fracture never fully heals. Megxit was not just the departure of Harry and Meghan. It was the starting point of a chain of confrontations that continues to this day. And from that original decision, every later dispute over security role and entitlement became unavoidable. The path was chosen at Sandringham. Everything that followed was merely consequence after consequence, each step pushing the royal family into its deepest crisis in decades. After Megxit, it seemed that certain boundaries were still being respected, until Spare was released. The book was not just a memoir, it was a direct strike at what remained of familial bonds. Harry wrote about William in a way that stunned the public. From private conflicts to details widely seen as humiliating, such as describing his brother's bald head. For the royal family, this was no longer personal disclosure. It was the exposure of internal family matters to the entire world. A boundary once considered inviolable had been crossed. The reaction inside the palace was described as quiet but intense. William did not respond publicly. But according to sources, the hurt transformed into a cold anger. For him, this was not simply a book. It was proof that Harry was willing to sacrifice the family's dignity to tell his own story. Every page was a cut, not only into the bond between brothers, but into the image of the monarchy that William was now responsible for protecting. Then came Netflix, and everything became worse. The documentary series did not merely repeat old accusations. It expanded them, it suggested, it raised doubts, and it relentlessly focused on the royal family as an oppressive system. What angered many people the most was the timing. When the series aired, Queen Elizabeth was in the final months of her life, frail, exhausted, yet still lucid enough to understand what was happening. Imagine Balmoral during those days. Not grandeur, only the stillness of a place preparing to say farewell to history. The Queen was briefed on the news every day. Headlines, extracts from the series. According to those close to her, she did not express anger. She simply sighed. A question is said to have been spoken in silence. Why is my son doing this? Not to the monarchy, but to his own family. For many Britons, this was an unforgivable moment, not because of criticism itself, but because of the sense of betrayal. A grandson using a global platform to tell his story while his grandmother was dying. The outrage no longer centered on right or wrong, it centered on morality, and for William, this was the point of no return. He no longer saw Spare or Netflix as media products. He saw them as final proof that Harry had chosen confrontation. From that moment on, nearly every door to reconciliation closed. There was no patience left, no space for sympathy. In William's eyes, Harry had not only left the royal family, he had turned his back on his own family at its most fragile moment, and that became the foundation for everything that is unfolding today. September 2025 marked what seemed like a final opportunity for healing. King Charles, by then deep into cancer treatment, still held on to a fragile hope. He believed that even if everything had gone too far, the bond between father and son might still find a way back. That was why he agreed to invite Harry to tea at Clarence House, not as a monarch, but as a father worn down by too much loss. According to journalist Rebecca English, the meeting did not unfold in the spirit of reconciliation Charles had hoped for. She described the king as having been railroaded, pushed into receiving the story on Harry's terms. Instead of listening to his father's pain, Harry focused on his own grievances. The conversation, based on what was later revealed, did not revolve around apology or repair. It revolved around Harry wanting to be recognized as the victim. Charles sat there, listening, but with every passing minute his hope faded. After the meeting, which lasted less than an hour, Charles left the tea table with a sense of emptiness. Not anger, but disillusionment. He realized that what he had hoped for did not exist in that conversation. There was no acknowledgement of harm, no apology, only an ever clearer distance between two worlds. And for the first time, Charles began to see things differently, no longer as a father clinging on, but as a king forced to face reality. In the days that followed, Charles spent more time walking in the gardens of Clarence House, an old habit, moving slowly, reflecting. And according to sources close to him, it was there that his perspective began to shift. He looked back at the chain of events from Megxit to Spare to Netflix and to the present moment. And he came to realize something William had said for a long time. There can be no reconciliation without accountability. There can be no next step without a clear apology. From that point on, Charles gradually aligned himself with his eldest son, not because he stopped loving Harry, but because he understood that constant concessions only made things worse. According to Rebecca English, Charles finally agreed with William's position, that if Harry wanted to return, wanted to be heard, wanted to meet again, the prerequisite was an apology first, not to the media, not to the public, but to the family. This shift did not happen loudly. There was no official statement, no hardline remarks. It revealed itself through actions. Charles chose to avoid Harry when he returned to Britain. Charles did not intervene in security requests. Charles allowed William to take the lead in setting boundaries. It was a silent transfer, a signal that the king had accepted the reality that control over the relationship with Harry was no longer in his hands. For William, this agreement marked a turning point. For the first time, he felt that his father truly understood the extent of the damage the family had endured, especially at a time when Catherine was battling illness. William did not want revenge. He wanted silence, stability, and absolute protection for his own small family. Charles at last chose to support that. But this awakening also carried deep sorrow. Charles understood that by setting the condition of an apology, he might have closed the final door. Harry is not someone who bows easily, and if Harry does not apologize, the distance will become permanent. This is the price Charles accepted, not out of hardness, but because he no longer had another choice. From this origin point, the consequences began to spread like unseen currents within the palace. One decision triggering many changes, from the father-son relationship to William's role, then the public reaction and the future of the monarchy. To fully understand those repercussions, each layer must be peeled back. And that is where the story moves into its next phase. After the 25 meeting, one change became clear in King Charles's behavior. Not because he grew colder, but because he was forced to become firmer. Those close to Clarence House noticed that the king no longer spoke of his grandchildren as naturally as before. No more small questions about school schedules or health. In their place was prolonged silence, a silence chosen deliberately. According to royal sources, Charles reached a painful decision. He would not see his grandchildren without a formal and explicit apology, not a private gesture, not a message through intermediaries, but a principled acknowledgement of wrongdoing. For a father, that was difficult. For a grandfather, it was almost cruel to himself. The context made this decision heavier than ever. Charles was undergoing cancer treatment. His strength was declining. Private time increasingly outweighed public appearances. In those moments, he confronted what everyone fears in later life: loneliness. Family photographs were carefully arranged on the wooden desk. Pictures of William as a child, pictures of Harry in his youth, and photos of grandchildren he rarely got to see. Yet Charles always returned to the role he could not shed, the head of an institution. In his thinking, the monarchy cannot survive if personal emotion overrides principle. He once quoted Edmund Burke, that institutions are not tools serving individuals, but moral commitments extending across generations. And he, even in weakness, had to be the one to uphold that commitment. Those who have worked with Charles for many years say he is not unfeeling. On the contrary, this decision made him quieter, less talkative, and more easily fatigued. But he did not allow himself to step back. Because if a king yields to personal pressure, the message sent outward becomes dangerous. That institutions can be bent by emotion. Charles chose to sacrifice part of his emotional life to preserve the continuity of the monarchy. This was not the choice of an ordinary father, but the choice of a king confronting his own limits. In his gaze there is sadness, there is regret, but there is also a cold acceptance that some roles once assumed can never be taken off. If Charles is the one who accepts pain in silence, then William is the one who acts with decisiveness. In internal discussions, William is described as firm to the point that many call it ruthless. He does not see this as a family dispute, but as a threat to the future of the throne. William has invoked historical precedent, the Duke of Windsor, a man who abandoned the throne and spent the rest of his life suspended between royalty and the outside world. To William, Harry is walking a similar path, and history shows that once the choice to leave is made, returning only wounds both sides. Therefore, he chooses to cut cleanly, decisively, without ambiguity. Behind that decision lies a very specific fear. William does not want his children to grow up in a monarchy torn apart by public narratives, personal revelations, interviews that erode trust. For him, protecting his children's future matters more than preserving harmony with his brother. Catherine stands in the middle. On the surface, she still appears beside William during NHS visits. She still wears the composed smile, still shakes hands and listens to patients. But those close to her know that the psychological pressure has left its marks. Fatigue is no longer easy to conceal. The silences in private working meetings have grown longer. Catherine has always placed great value on family. And precisely because of that, this fracture has not been easy for her. But she also understands what William is carrying. Not only the role of a brother, but the role of an heir, someone who must think beyond personal emotion. In rare private moments, William is said to hold his children longer than usual, as a way of reminding himself why he must be so firm. The Prince and Princess of Wales walk forward with outward calm, but inside is a chain of difficult choices. No choice is complete. There are only choices that cause the least harm to the future of the monarchy. And that is what turns this story from the tragedy of a single family into a marker of how the next generation understands power, responsibility, and the cost of protecting the throne. On the other side of the Atlantic, Harry and Meghan are facing a reality that is hard to deny. They have spent nearly all of the symbolic capital the monarchy once gave them. When they left Britain, they did so as initiators, as those who broke the old order to claim freedom. But by 2025, the balance of power has shifted. They are no longer the ones setting conditions. They are the ones waiting for a response. From a prince born inside palace walls, Harry now appears before the public as someone seeking recognition. His statements about pain, injustice, and betrayal once generated waves of sympathy. But when repeated too often, they gradually lose weight. The public begins to ask a direct question. If everyone is a victim, then where does personal responsibility lie? The prolonged legal battles are seen as a counter-offensive, a way to prove that Harry was not wrong, that the monarchy and the media treated him unfairly. But the outcome did not restore his reputation as hoped. Instead, it reinforced an image of stubbornness, of being trapped in the past, and increasingly disconnected from the real concerns of the British public. For Meghan, her media strategy was once sharp, but its limits have gradually been exposed. Personal projects no longer generate the same impact. Public appearances are examined more closely, not because of power, but because of doubt. Are they telling their own story, or are they trying to extend a role whose time has already passed? Public reaction in Britain is the decisive factor. Opinion polls show clear fatigue. No more anger, no more fierce debate, only indifference. And in symbolic politics, indifference is the most dangerous signal of all. When people no longer need you even to argue, you have already been pushed to the margins. The image of Harry and Montecito has become an inverse symbol, no longer the rebellious son of the monarchy, but someone standing outside the door, looking in at a system that has chosen to move forward without him. This isolation is not the result of an official ban, but of deliberate silence from the royal family. The bitter truth for Harry and Meghan is that they continue to speak about the monarchy, while the monarchy no longer speaks about them. That imbalance shows that symbolic power has changed hands. They are no longer at the center of the story, only a peripheral branch, and in the larger picture, they are learning a late lesson. That reputation is not an infinite asset. When it is spent too freely, it runs out. No expulsion is required, no official declaration, only time, and the cold turning away of the public. After all the conflicts, the lawsuits, the bitter interviews, the central question is no longer whether Harry is right or wrong. It is where the British monarchy is heading. And the answer is gradually becoming clear. Rather than weakening, the monarchy appears more disciplined, more cautious, and more focused on its core role. For William, the path to succession has never been clearer. He is not building his image through emotional declarations, but through steady presence, NHS visits, quiet meetings with healthcare workers, community engagements without spectacle. William is sending a very clear message. The monarchy exists to serve, not to complain. The British public is responding positively to that approach. After years of exhaustion from family drama, they want stability. They want to see the monarchy return to its traditional role as a continuous symbol of the nation, not a stage for personal conflict. And in that context, William emerges as a natural choice, unshowy, but dependable. At an institutional level, the monarchy has also drawn a costly lesson. From Megxit to Spare to Netflix, they have come to understand that controlled silence can sometimes be more powerful than rebuttal. There are no longer emotional reactions, no more concessions driven by fear of public opinion. Instead, there are clear boundaries. Who is inside? Who is outside? Who serves the institution? And who chooses a separate path? Harry has therefore been placed in a position that is difficult to reverse. There is no door back to his former role, no vague reconciliations. In the future, there may be private family moments. But publicly, the message from William is unmistakable. There is no room for instability, no exceptions for those who harm the system. This creates a feeling that is both hopeful and cold. Hopeful because the monarchy appears to have learned how to protect itself. Cold because the price paid is the severing of blood ties. But British royal history shows that the institution is always chosen over family. And this time is no different. The future of the monarchy, therefore, does not lie in reconciliation with Harry. It lies in maintaining public trust. William understands this. Charles has accepted it. And the entire system is adjusting to adapt to a new era. Less emotion, more discipline. From climax to consequence, this drama is not merely a family matter. It is a lesson about loyalty, about choice, and about the cost of stepping outside a system you were born to inherit. And from here, we move into the conclusion, where every final piece falls into place. Looking back at the entire chain of events, the picture is clearer than ever. An aging king who changed course, a future heir who refused forgiveness, and a prince who placed himself into exile. Charles once hoped. He opened the doors of Clarence's house with the exhaustion of a father, not with the authority of a monarch. But after that meeting, he realized something painful. Affection alone is no longer enough when trust has been broken. Charles's shift was not coldness. It was the final act of self-defense by a man fighting illness and responsibility at the same time. William is different. He does not view this story through the lens of politics, but through the eyes of a husband. When Catherine lay in hospital, when months of treatment cast a shadow over their young family, William could not separate that pain from the years of relentless stress. The books, the films, the accusations, the unending attacks on his own family. And Harry, once beloved by an entire nation, now stands outside the gates of the monarchy. The lawsuits, the security demands, the grievances, it has pushed him further away from the role he once held. This drama is no longer a sibling conflict. It has become a bitter lesson about stress, about choice, and about loyalty when it is tested to its absolute limit. Try placing yourself in William's position. If you were him, what would you do? Forgive the person who caused the one you love to endure deep suffering, or protect your family at any cost, even if it means cutting off blood ties. The British monarchy has long taught a harsh lesson. The institution always comes before the individual, not because they are heartless, but because if emotion leads the way, the entire system collapses. William is not acting as a younger brother. He is acting as a man who will become king. And that choice has caused deep pain. But it has also allowed the monarchy to endure. And what about you? Do you think Harry will ever truly apologize? Not with words, but with actions. Leave a comment below to share your perspective. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following the latest royal drama. Thank you for staying with us until the final moment, as if we have just walked together through the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, where power, blood ties, and choice always collide in silence.